My teacher pulled me aside after class and said, "You're not safe at home. Come with me now." Mrs. Livingston had never touched me before, not in the 3 years I'd been in her English class. She kept professional distance from all her students, the kind of teacher who corrected papers with surgical precision and never got involved in drama. So when her hand closed around my wrist as everyone else filed out for lunch, my first instinct was to pull away. Her grip tightened and her voice dropped to a whisper that made my skin prickle with fear I didn't understand yet. The hallway was emptying fast, students flooding toward the cafeteria, and she pulled me back toward her desk with urgency that seemed almost violent. I'm 16, and I thought I understood when adults were overreacting, when they were being dramatic about nothing. My parents fought sometimes, and my dad had a temper, but that was normal, wasn't it? Everybody's parents argued. Mrs. Livingston's face was pale and tight, her usually perfect composure cracking as she grabbed her purse and jacket with her free hand while still holding my wrist with the other. She wasn't asking permission or explaining, just moving with purpose toward the classroom door while I stumbled along beside her, trying to understand what was happening. "Mrs. Livingston, what are you doing? I have algebra next period and I can't just leave." My voice came out higher than I intended, panic starting to override confusion. She didn't answer, just pulled me into the hallway and toward the side exit that led to the faculty parking lot. I could see other teachers through open doorways, preparing for their next classes, completely oblivious to whatever crisis Mrs. Livingston thought was happening. She was breathing hard like she'd been running, and I realized her hand was shaking where it gripped my wrist. We burst through the side exit into bright October sunlight, and she pulled me toward a silver sedan parked in the faculty lot. She unlocked it with fumbling hands and practically shoved me into the passenger seat before running around to the driver's side. The engine started and we were pulling out of the parking lot before I could process what was happening, before I could demand real answers or threaten to scream or do anything except sit frozen in shock as my English teacher kidnapped me from school in the middle of the day. "You need to call my parents right now or I'm calling the police." I reached for my phone in my backpack, but Mrs. Livingston's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist again, hard enough to hurt this time. Her eyes met mine, and what I saw there made my blood turn cold. Raw fear mixed with determination and something else I couldn't identify. Something that looked almost like grief. She held my gaze for 3 seconds that felt like hours before returning her attention to the road, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "Your mother called the school this morning," she said finally, her voice shaking. "She told the principal she was withdrawing you effective immediately. She said your family was moving out of state for your father's job and you wouldn't be returning." The principal signed the paperwork without question. Because everything looked official, all the forms were correct. "But Iris, your mother also sent a withdrawal form for your sister Melody, your sister who died 4 years ago." The world tilted sideways and I gripped the door handle to steady myself. Melody had drowned in our backyard pool when she was 6 and I was 12. An accident that destroyed our family in ways we never recovered from. My parents never talked about her, kept her room exactly as she'd left it like a shrine. Pretended at dinner that there wasn't a gaping hole where my little sister used to sit. Mrs. Livingston saying her name felt like a violation, like she'd reached into my chest and grabbed something private and sacred. That doesn't make sense. Mom wouldn't fill out forms for Melody. She can barely say her name out loud. "You're wrong about this. You have to be wrong." But even as I said it, doubt was creeping in. Mom had been acting strange for the past week, crying at random times and hugging me too tight, telling me she loved me more than anything in the world with this desperate edge in her voice. Dad had been working late every night, coming home after I was asleep and leaving before I woke up, avoiding me in ways that felt deliberate. Mrs. Livingston took a sharp left turn, and I realized we were heading out of town toward the highway. I've been teaching for 18 years, and I've seen patterns before parents who withdraw students suddenly with vague explanations about moving, about new opportunities. Most of the time it's innocent, just families relocating for work or personal reasons, but sometimes there are warning signs that something else is happening. Your mother filled out forms for a dead child, Iris. That's not a simple mistake or a clerical error. That's a woman who's dissociating from reality or trying to erase what happened or planning something terrible. My phone buzzed in my hand and I looked down to see 3 missed calls from Mom and a text message that made my stomach turn over. "Where are you? Come home right now. We need to talk about something important as a family." I showed it to Mrs. Livingston and watched her face go even paler. She pressed harder on the gas pedal and the speedometer climbed past 70 as we merged onto the highway heading north. "I need to call someone," Mrs. Livingston said, more to herself than to me. "I need to contact authorities who can help us. But if I call the police right now, they'll just send you home. You're a minor and your parents have full custody, and there's no evidence of immediate danger. Just my instinct based on paperwork that could be explained away as a clerical mistake. We need more time to figure out what's really happening before anyone forces you back to a situation that might not be safe." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was overreacting and my parents would never hurt me despite their grief and their weirdness. But Melody's face kept floating through my mind. Her smile on the last morning before the accident, the way Mom had screamed when she found her floating in the pool. Something had broken in my parents that day. Something fundamental that never healed. What if Mrs. Livingston was right? What if whatever darkness lived in our house since Melody died was finally consuming everything? My phone rang again, and this time it was Dad calling. I stared at his name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Mrs. Livingston glanced over and shook her head firmly. "Don't answer it yet. Not until we understand what's happening." The phone rang 4 more times and then stopped, followed immediately by a text from Dad that was just 2 words. "Call immediately." We drove for another 20 minutes before Mrs. Livingston pulled off the highway into a rest stop parking lot. She turned off the engine and sat gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "I'm going to tell you something that might sound insane, but I need you to listen to the whole thing before you react. Can you do that?" I nodded mutely, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. 3 weeks ago, your mother came to see me after school. She wanted to talk about your progress in my class, which was unusual because you're an A student, and parents don't typically schedule conferences for kids who are doing well, but she insisted it was important, so I agreed to meet with her. Iris, she didn't ask about your grades or your homework. She asked me detailed questions about you as a person, what you talked about with friends, whether you seemed happy, if you ever mentioned feeling unsafe or scared. I thought she was just being an anxious parent, maybe concerned about your mental health. Mrs. Livingston turned to face me fully, her expression intense. Then 2 days ago, she came back. This time she was different. More agitated, she asked me if I believed people could be redeemed for their mistakes, if someone who'd done something terrible could ever make it right. She was crying and kept saying she'd failed one daughter and she couldn't fail another. I tried to get her to explain what she meant, but she just left, practically running out of my classroom. That's when I started paying closer attention to your family situation. My mouth was dry and my hands were shaking. What did you find? Mrs. Livingston pulled out her phone and opened a browser window, showing me search results for my family's name. The first few hits were news articles from 4 years ago about Melody's death, the tragic drowning that shocked our small community. But then there were other articles Mrs. Livingston had bookmarked, older ones from before we moved to this town, about a different family with different names but the same faces in the photos. Your parents aren't who they say they are, Mrs. Livingston said quietly. The names they use now are different from the names they used 6 years ago when they lived in California. Back then, they were Richard and Diane Foster with 2 daughters, Melody and a girl named Lily, who would be about your age now. There were no news reports about Lily after they moved, no death certificate or missing person report. She just disappeared from records entirely. And 6 months later, Richard and Diane Foster became Nathan and Carolyn Hayes in Washington State with 2 daughters, Melody and Iris. The information was too big to process, too impossible to be real. That's not possible. I remember my whole childhood. I remember being Iris Hayes. I remember birthday parties and school photos and family vacations. But even as I said it, something was shifting in my memory. Pieces that didn't quite fit together, clicking into new configurations. I remembered Melody's 6th birthday party, but I couldn't remember my own 7th birthday the same year. I remembered starting 4th grade, but the details were fuzzy. Like I was remembering a story someone told me rather than actual lived experience. Mrs. Livingston showed me more articles, more evidence she'd compiled, photos of the Foster family where the mother and father were clearly my parents, despite different hairstyles and heavier features. Photos of 2 girls who looked like Melody and me, identified in captions as Melody and Lily Foster. The older girl had my eyes and my smile, but her hair was lighter and she held herself differently, less confident, almost hunched like she was trying to take up less space. "I think something happened to Lily," Mrs. Livingston said, her voice gentle despite the terrible words. "I think your parents did something that made them need to run and reinvent themselves with new identities, and I think they've been living with that guilt for 6 years, trying to pretend it never happened. When Melody died in the pool accident, it broke whatever fragile stability they'd constructed. Your mother filling out withdrawal forms for both you and Melody suggests she's planning something that involves both her daughters, the living one and the dead one." My phone rang again, Mom this time, and I watched it buzz in my hand until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text appeared. "Iris, sweetie, please answer your phone. We're so worried about you. Your teacher had no right to take you from school. We're calling the police if you don't come home right now." The words looked normal, concerned parenting, but I kept thinking about that withdrawal form, with Melody's name on it, and the desperate way Mom had been hugging me lately like she was saying goodbye. "What do you think they're planning to do?" I asked, and my voice sounded small and scared. Mrs. Livingston's expression was pained when she answered, "I think your mother wants to reunite her family, both daughters. I think she's been planning some kind of murder-suicide to join Melody, wherever she believes Melody is now. And I think your father either agrees with her or doesn't know how to stop her. So he's been avoiding home to avoid facing what's coming." The accusation was so enormous, so impossible to accept. My parents were sad and broken and weird, but they weren't murderers. They weren't planning to kill me just to be together with my dead sister, except Mom had been giving away her jewelry over the past week, telling me to keep her favorite necklace and her wedding ring because they were important. Dad had sat me down last weekend and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him, that he was sorry he hadn't been a better father, that he loved me more than I would ever understand. Those were goodbye speeches. Those were the words of parents who knew they were running out of time. "We need to go to the police right now," I said, reaching for my seatbelt. "We need to tell them everything, and they can help figure out what's real and what's not." But Mrs. Livingston caught my hand again, her grip desperate. "Iris, I called the police yesterday. I explained my concerns about the withdrawal forms and the identity changes and the suspicious behavior. They said unless there was evidence of immediate danger to you, they couldn't investigate based on speculation. They said parents have the right to withdraw their children from school and change their identities if they want, and none of it constituted grounds for intervention. They told me if I continued making unfounded accusations, I could be charged with harassment." I stared at her, processing what she'd just admitted. So, you kidnapped me instead? You grabbed me from school and drove me out of town because the police wouldn't listen to your theory? Mrs. Livingston flinched at the word kidnapped but didn't deny it. I couldn't let you go home. Not when every instinct I have says you're in danger. I've been teaching long enough to trust those instincts. Yes, I could be wrong. Yes, this could all be a massive misunderstanding and I could lose my job and face criminal charges. But if I'm right and I did nothing, you'd be dead. My phone was ringing constantly now. Calls from both parents overlapping. Texts coming in rapid succession. We love you so much. Please come home. We need to talk about Melody. That last one made my breath catch because we never talked about Melody. The silent agreement that kept our family from completely falling apart. If they wanted to talk about her now, something had fundamentally shifted. Mrs. Livingston started the car again and pulled back onto the highway, heading north with no clear destination. I have a friend who works in family services in the next state over. She's agreed to meet with us and evaluate the situation. See if there's grounds for emergency intervention. It's a 3-hour drive, but it's the only option I can think of that keeps you safe while we figure this out. I need you to trust me, Iris. I know this is terrifying and confusing, but I need you to trust that I'm doing this because I genuinely believe your life is in danger. I looked at this woman who'd taught me English for 3 years, who'd praised my essays and encouraged my writing and never been anything except professional and kind. She was risking everything on a hunch based on paperwork and old news articles and her gut instinct that something was wrong. Either she was right and my parents were planning to murder me, or she was catastrophically wrong and had just destroyed her career and possibly earned kidnapping charges by stealing me from school. There was no middle ground where this ended well for her. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why risk everything for a student you barely know? Mrs. Livingston's hands tightened on the steering wheel and her voice went rough with emotion she'd been holding back. Because I had a student 8 years ago in a different school who showed warning signs I ignored. Parents who isolated her, sudden behavioral changes, hints that something was wrong at home. I told myself I was overreacting, that it wasn't my place to interfere. 3 weeks later, her father killed her and her mother, and then himself. I've lived with that guilt every day since, wondering if I could have saved her if I just acted on my instincts instead of worrying about overstepping boundaries. The confession hung in the air between us, and I understood suddenly that this wasn't just about me. This was Mrs. Livingston trying to save the student she couldn't save 8 years ago, trying to rewrite history by protecting me from a danger that might not even be real. But what if it was real? What if my parents' grief had finally consumed them completely, and they decided the only way to heal was to erase everything and start over somewhere they believed Melody was waiting? My phone buzzed with a new text, this time from a number I didn't recognize. This is Detective Paul Granger with the county police. Your parents have reported you missing and your teacher as a possible kidnapper. We're tracking your location through your phone signal. For your safety, please respond and let us know if you're being held against your will. I showed the message to Mrs. Livingston and watched her face crumble. They'd escalated faster than she expected, brought in law enforcement who would treat this as a kidnapping, because that's technically what it was. I need to turn off my phone, I said, already powering it down before Mrs. Livingston could respond. If they're tracking it, they'll find us before we get to your friend, and this will all be over. Mrs. Livingston looked at me with something like hope in her eyes. You believe me? You think I'm right about your parents? I didn't know what I believed, but I knew the text from my mom about needing to talk about Melody had felt wrong, in a way I couldn't explain. I knew my parents' behavior over the past week had been strange enough to notice, and I knew Mrs. Livingston was putting her entire life on the line because she believed I was in danger. I believe you believe it, I said carefully, and that's enough for now. We drove in silence for another hour, 2 women running from a danger that might be imaginary, or might be the most real thing in the world. Mrs. Livingston kept checking her rearview mirror like she expected police cars to appear at any moment, her anxiety bleeding into the confined space until I was checking mirrors too, jumping at every vehicle that came too close. Around 2 in the afternoon, Mrs. Livingston pulled into a gas station and used cash to fill the tank, avoiding credit cards that could be traced. While she was pumping gas, I used the bathroom and stared at myself in the grimy mirror above the sink. I looked like Iris Hayes, 16-year-old high school junior with brown hair and my father's nose. But what if I was actually Lily Foster, a girl who disappeared from records 6 years ago, whose identity had been erased and replaced with someone else? How could I trust my own memories when Mrs. Livingston had shown me evidence that my entire childhood might be fabricated? I thought about the scars on my arms that I'd always been told came from a bike accident when I was 9, but I couldn't actually remember the accident itself. I thought about how I had no friends from before we moved to this town when I was 10, no maintained relationships or pen pal connections to earlier life. I thought about how my parents never displayed photos from my early childhood, claiming they'd been lost in the move. All of it could be innocent coincidence, or all of it could be evidence that I'd been someone else before becoming Iris Hayes. When I came out of the bathroom, Mrs. Livingston was standing by the car, talking urgently on her phone. She hung up when she saw me, and her expression was grim. My friend in family services says she needs more than theories and old news articles to justify emergency intervention. She needs evidence of immediate danger or a credible witness statement about abuse. Without that, if we show up with you, she'll have no choice but to return you to your parents' custody, and I'll be arrested for kidnapping. The weight of that settled over us as we got back in the car. Mrs. Livingston had bet everything on this plan, and it was falling apart before we even arrived. What do we do now? I asked, and she looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. I don't know. I thought I was saving you, but maybe I'm just making everything worse. Maybe I should take you to the police station and explain everything and hope they understand I was trying to help. But something in me rebelled against that idea, against going home to parents who'd been saying goodbye in ways I'd been too blind to recognize. No, I said firmly. Something is wrong at my house. I can feel it now that you've pointed it out. My parents have been acting like they're running out of time, like they're preparing for something final. We just need to find proof of whatever they're planning before the police force me to go home. Mrs. Livingston looked at me with surprise and something like respect. What kind of proof? I thought about Melody's room, preserved exactly as she'd left it. A shrine to grief that my parents tended obsessively. My sister's room, my parents never let anyone in there. They keep it locked. But Mom has a key on her keychain, and there's a spare hidden in her jewelry box. If they're planning something related to Melody, there might be evidence in her room. Letters, plans, something that shows what they're thinking. We can't break into your house, Iris. That's actually illegal and would destroy any credibility I have left. But I could see her considering it, weighing the risk against the potential reward. Unless, she said slowly, we had permission from someone who lives there. Do you have a key to your house? I nodded and pulled my house key from my backpack. Then you're not breaking in. You're entering your own home to retrieve your belongings. If I come with you as your teacher who's concerned for your welfare, we're just making sure you have what you need. The logic was flimsy enough to tear apart in any court, but desperation was making both of us willing to take risks we'd never normally consider. Mrs. Livingston turned the car around and headed back toward town, back toward my house where my parents might be waiting or might be out searching for me. We'd have maybe 30 minutes before the police expected us to surface somewhere, before the manhunt intensified beyond just phone tracking. We reached my neighborhood around 3:30, late enough that most people were still at work, early enough that students hadn't been released from school yet. My house looked normal from the outside, the same white two-story colonial with blue shutters that I'd lived in for 6 years. Mrs. Livingston parked 2 houses down, and we approached on foot, both of us scanning for signs that my parents were home. The driveway was empty, and the windows were dark, though that didn't mean anything definitive. I used my key to open the front door, and the familiar smell of home hit me like a physical force. Lavender air freshener and coffee and the lingering scent of my dad's cologne. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it that morning when I'd grabbed toast in my backpack and run for the school bus. Nothing suggested danger or crisis or parents planning murder-suicide. I almost laughed at the absurdity of what we were doing, breaking into my own house to find evidence of a threat that probably didn't exist. I said, Mrs. Livingston touched my shoulder and pointed upstairs where Melody's room waited, locked and forbidden. We climbed the stairs quietly, even though the house was clearly empty. Both of us operating on the same paranoid frequency. Melody's door had a keyed lock that my parents had installed after her death. Unusual security for an interior door. I went to my parents' bedroom and found the spare key in Mom's jewelry box exactly where I remembered seeing it years ago. The lock clicked and Melody's door swung open, and I stepped into a room frozen in time. Her bed was still unmade from the morning she died. Her clothes still scattered on the floor, her drawings still taped to the walls. But there was something new that made my blood run cold. On her bed was a white dress, small enough for a 6-year-old, laid out carefully like Melody was about to wear it. Next to it was a larger white dress, my size, with a note pinned to the chest in my mother's handwriting. Mrs. Livingston picked up the note with shaking hands and read it aloud. My darling girls, I know you don't understand now, but you will soon. We're going to be together again. All of us, the way we were supposed to be. No more pain, no more grief, no more living in this broken world without Melody. Put on your dress, Iris. We're going to see your sister today, and we're all going to be happy again. Mom. The room tilted, and I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. Mrs. Livingston was right. My parents were planning exactly what she'd feared. My mother had bought me a white dress to die in, had laid it out next to Melody's dress like we were going to some kind of morbid reunion. The casual tone of the note, the way it treated murder-suicide like a family outing, was more horrifying than any explicit threat could have been. Mrs. Livingston took photos of everything with her phone, documenting the dresses and the note and the entire preserved room. This is enough, she said, her voice shaking. This is evidence of immediate danger. We need to get to the police station right now and show them this before your parents come home and try to complete whatever they're planning. But I was staring at something else on Melody's dresser, a photo album I'd never seen before. I picked it up with trembling hands and opened to the first page photos of a family I recognized but not the family I knew. The same parents with different names according to the captions. Richard and Diane Foster with their daughters Melody and Lily. Photos of birthday parties and beach vacations and normal family moments. Photos of me, except I was called Lily, and I looked slightly different, less sure of myself, wearing clothes I didn't remember owning. I flipped through page after page, watching Lily Foster's childhood unfold in images I didn't recognize, but should have remembered if they were really my life. Then the photos stopped abruptly. The last image in the album showed Lily at what looked like age 10, sitting in a bedroom that wasn't her room in our current house, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was hard to read, fear maybe, or resignation. Below it, my mother had written in careful script, Lily's last day with us. May she forgive us for what we had to do. Mrs. Livingston read over my shoulder, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. What does that mean? What did they do? I couldn't answer because I was drowning in implications, in the terrible possibility that whatever happened to Lily Foster was coming for Iris Hayes. Maybe Lily hadn't disappeared. Maybe she'd been transformed into someone new. her memory erased or suppressed, her identity rebuilt as Iris Hayes. But why? What had happened that required that kind of desperate reinvention? My phone was still off, but Mrs. Livingston's rang suddenly, shrill in the quiet house. She looked at the screen and her face went white. "It's the police. They know we're here." She answered with a shaking hand, and I heard a man's voice on the other end. Detective Granger demanding to know our location and insisting Mrs. Livingston was making things worse by continuing to keep me from my family. She tried to explain about the dresses and the note, about evidence of danger, but he cut her off with official-sounding language about custody and proper channels, and coming in immediately. "We need to leave right now," Mrs. Livingston said, grabbing my arm. But footsteps on the front porch stopped us both. The front door opened, and my father's voice called out, "Iris? Are you home, sweetheart?" His tone was gentle and concerned, the voice of a worried parent. But I kept thinking about that note on the dress and the photos of Lily Foster, and the way he'd been saying goodbye all week. Mrs. Livingston pulled me into Melody's closet, and we pressed ourselves against the back wall behind hanging clothes that still smelled faintly of my dead sister. Through the slats in the closet door, I watched my father enter the room. He stopped when he saw the dresses on the bed, the album open on the floor where I'd dropped it. His expression crumbled into something between grief and resignation. "Caroline!" he called out, and Mom's footsteps thundered up the stairs. She appeared in the doorway and saw the disturbed room, the evidence that someone had been here. "She's been in Melody's room," Dad said, his voice hollow. "She found the dresses." Mom covered her mouth with both hands and started crying, these deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. "It's too soon. We haven't prepared her. She's not ready to understand." Dad pulled Mom into his arms and held her while she cried, and I watched from the closet feeling like I was observing strangers. "Maybe this is better," Dad said quietly. "Maybe it's time to tell her the truth about everything, about Lily, about what we did, about why we had to start over. She deserves to know before we take the next step." Mrs. Livingston's hand found mine in the darkness of the closet and squeezed tight. We were listening to my parents confirm everything she'd suspected, confessing to sins I didn't fully understand yet. What had they done to Lily? What truth were they planning to tell me before enacting whatever finale those white dresses represented? Mom pulled away from Dad and wiped her eyes. "Where is she now? We need to find her before the police do, before anyone else fills her head with ideas about us being dangerous. She needs to hear this from us." Dad pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in low tones I couldn't make out. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "Detective Granger says they've tracked her phone to the area, but the signal's off now. He's sending units to check the school and her friends' houses. He thinks her teacher has taken her somewhere, convinced her we're some kind of threat. That teacher doesn't understand," Mom said, and her voice had an edge of hysteria. "She doesn't know what we've been through, what we've sacrificed to keep both our girls safe. If she takes Iris away from us, if they put her in the system, everything we did will have been for nothing. Lily's sacrifice will have been meaningless." I stopped breathing at the word sacrifice. Whatever had happened to Lily Foster hadn't been benign identity change or witness protection. It had been something requiring sacrifice, something my parents framed as necessary. Mrs. Livingston's grip on my hand had become painful, but I couldn't move. Couldn't make a sound while my parents stood 10 feet away, discussing the daughter they'd erased. Dad sat on Melody's bed, crushing the white dresses beneath him without seeming to notice. "Maybe we should tell the police everything. Maybe it's time to face consequences for what we did. We've been running for 6 years, and look where it's gotten us. One daughter dead, one daughter terrified of us, living under assumed names in constant fear of being discovered. This isn't the life we promised Lily we'd build." Mom rounded on him with sudden fury. "We did what we had to do to protect Iris from the same fate that would have taken Lily. You know what would have happened if we'd stayed. If we'd let the system process her like they wanted, she'd be dead or institutionalized or medicated into oblivion. We saved her by becoming someone new, by giving her a chance at normal life as Iris Hayes. Don't you dare suggest that was wrong." The pieces were starting to fit together in horrible ways. Lily Foster had been sick or disabled or different in some way that made my parents desperate enough to fake her death or disappearance and reconstruct her as healthy, normal Iris Hayes. They'd moved states, changed identities, created an entire false history to give their damaged daughter a fresh start. And when Melody died 4 years into that new life, it broke whatever fragile justification had kept them going. A phone rang and Dad answered, his expression shifting as he listened. "The police are 2 minutes out," he said to Mom. "We need to decide right now. Do we tell them everything and hope they understand? Or do we stick to the plan and finish what we started?" Mom looked at the white dresses on the bed and her face hardened into something determined. "We finish it. We bring both our girls together. It's the only way to make this right." Mrs. Livingston's phone was recording everything, capturing my parents' confession to whatever crime they'd committed 6 years ago and whatever new crime they were planning now. But none of that mattered if we couldn't get out of this closet alive. Couldn't escape before my parents completed their plan to reunite their daughters through death. I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer, and I prayed the police would arrive before my parents found us. Dad stood and walked toward the closet. "Caroline, check in here. If she came for the dresses, she might still be hiding." His hand reached for the closet door handle, and Mrs. Livingston pushed me behind her, putting herself between me and my father. The door swung open, and Dad's eyes met mine through the gap in the hanging clothes. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then his expression crumbled into devastation. "Lily," he whispered, using a name I didn't recognize as mine. "You weren't supposed to find out like this. We were going to explain everything, help you understand why we did what we did. Mom appeared beside him and saw me in the closet, saw Mrs. Livingston shielding me with her body. Her face went through shock and betrayal before settling on something that looked almost like relief. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to pretend to be Iris. You can go back to being Lily, our real daughter, and we can all be together again." The words didn't make sense until they did, until the full horror of what my mother was saying penetrated. She wasn't seeing me as Iris, who used to be Lily. She was seeing me as Lily pretending to be Iris, like the past 6 years had been an act I was performing. The delusion was so complete, so divorced from reality, that I understood my mother had broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. Mrs. Livingston stepped out of the closet with her phone held up, still recording. "Mr. and Mrs. Foster, I'm recording everything you've said. The police are on their way, and they'll see evidence of your plans to harm Iris. You need to step away from us right now and let us leave without incident." Dad laughed, this bitter sound that held no humor. "You don't understand anything. We're not the monsters you think we are. We were trying to save our daughter from a system that wanted to destroy her. By faking her death and giving her a new identity?" Mrs. Livingston demanded. "By planning to kill her along with yourselves in some kind of reunion fantasy with your deceased daughter? That's not saving anyone. That's murder-suicide based on delusional thinking." Mom lunged at Mrs. Livingston and I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat raw and terrified. Dad grabbed Mom and pulled her back while Mrs. Livingston shoved me toward the bedroom door. We ran for the stairs with my parents shouting behind us, words I couldn't process through the panic flooding my system. The front door burst open and police officers swarmed in with weapons drawn, voices commanding everyone to get down, to put their hands up, to not move. I collapsed on the stairs and watched officers surround my parents, watched them be forced to the ground and handcuffed while they kept calling me Lily and insisting they were trying to save me. Detective Granger approached where Mrs. Livingston and I were sitting on the stairs, both of us shaking with adrenaline and shock. He looked at Mrs. Livingston with new respect. "We heard the recording from your phone through the 911 line you kept open. We have enough now to charge them with conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment, and whatever the hell they did 6 years ago when they faked their daughter's death and assumed new identities." Mrs. Livingston showed him the photos of the dresses and the note, the album full of Lily Foster's childhood, the evidence of systematic planning for murder-suicide. Detective Granger's expression darkened as he reviewed everything. "Jesus Christ, you were right about all of it." He looked at me with something like pity. "We're going to need to sort out who you actually are, whether you're Iris Hayes or Lily Foster or some combination of both. We'll need medical records, forensic analysis, probably psychiatric evaluation. This is going to be a long process." I couldn't think about process or analysis. I could only think about my parents being led out in handcuffs, still calling me Lily, still insisting they'd done everything out of love. Mrs. Livingston put her arm around my shoulders and I leaned into her. This woman who'd risked everything on a hunch because she refused to fail another student. "What happens to me now?" I asked, and my voice sounded small and lost. "For tonight, protective custody until we can figure out if you have other family. Long-term," Detective Granger trailed off, clearly uncertain. "That depends on what we learn about your actual identity and history. But you're safe now. That's what matters." Safe felt like an inadequate word for this situation where my entire identity was in question, where the parents who raised me had been planning my murder, where I might not even be the person I thought I was. The investigation took 3 months to unravel completely. What they found was worse than even Mrs. Livingston had suspected. Lily Foster hadn't been sick or disabled. She'd been a witness to a crime, had seen her father kill a man in a road rage incident when she was 10 years old. The prosecutor wanted her to testify, but my parents decided they couldn't let her be traumatized by the trial process, couldn't let her be exposed to media attention and psychological evaluation. So they'd made her disappear, faking a kidnapping that went unsolved while they fled the state with new identities. They'd convinced Lily through a combination of manipulation and medication that she'd always been Iris Hayes, that Lily Foster was a bad dream, that this new life was her only reality. When Melody died 4 years later, the grief broke through my mother's careful delusions, and she'd decided the only way to fix everything was to reunite her family in death. Learning this truth shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. I spent weeks in therapy trying to separate real memories from implanted ones, trying to figure out who Lily had been versus who Iris had become. Eventually, I decided I was both and neither. A person forged from trauma and lies but still whole, still worthy of a life my parents had tried to steal twice over. Mrs. Livingston lost her teaching position for the kidnapping, despite being proven right about everything. She faced charges that were eventually reduced to a suspended sentence based on evidence she'd saved my life. 6 months later, she became my legal guardian through a process that felt appropriate, given she'd been the only adult brave enough to protect me. My parents are serving 25 to life for attempted murder, identity fraud, and the death of the man my father killed 6 years ago. I kept the name Iris because Lily feels like someone who died when she was 10. But I visit my father's victim's grave every year on the anniversary and tell him someone remembers what happened to Mrs. Livingston. I call her Anne now. Says healing isn't linear, but we're building something real from the wreckage, one honest day at a time. Some families are born, some are made, and some are forged in the aftermath of nearly being destroyed, trusting someone who believed you were worth saving. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.